My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 33. Bakugou mindlessly chewed the breakfast on the plate before him. Honestly, he couldn't taste much of it anyway. It was partly due to the fact that Uraraka was the one who cooked it, but the bigger part was the topic weighing on his mind. He needs to tell her about Edshot's stupid fucking rule. He couldn't figure out why it was eating him so much. He hadn't slept well last night because of it, and he'd stayed up most of the night listening to what Uraraka mumbled in her sleep. He knew it was a sensible rule to have in the agency, but he couldn't get past that fact that the universe seemed to have it out for them. Right when he had managed to get her, she could be chased off again. It was fucking frustrating. He hadn't said much since they got up that morning. The sun had been up for a while now, but it didn't lift his mood as he watched Uraraka wipe down her countertop with a rag. It irked him that even with bedhead and lingering circles under her eyes, she looked pretty great to him. The damn woman had her hooks in him, and that was enough for him to loathe himself. What's wrong? The blonde blinked before he'd realized that he'd been staring at her, a half-chewed bite forgotten in his cheeks. He cleared his throat as he went back to work on the food in his mouth and looked away from her with a slightly embarrassed flush on his cheeks. Nothing, he replied quietly. Well, it's obviously something. Uraraka frowned slightly as she narrowed her eyes at him from across the countertop. I said it's nothing, Bakugou replied quickly, a short edge to his tone. He glared down at the breakfast and grunted in irritation. He ran a hand over his forehead as he propped his elbow beside his plate. Uraraka sighed defeatedly and tossed the now bundled-up dish towel onto the counter in front of her. She finally broke her gaze away from him to look around her kitchen. Whatever was bothering him would have to wait. Clearly, he didn't want to talk about it. She knew it had something to do with his conversation with Earthworm after she left the previous night. When he'd shown up at her place, he hadn't been entirely present with her, and she knew that he'd tossed and turned the entire night. Normally, he was quite the restless sleeper, but he hadn't accidentally woken her up at any point. She was beginning to feel a bit concerned for him, and her feelings were slightly hurt that he wouldn't share it with her. Oh well, perhaps he isn't as serious as she thought. Hey. It was the brunette's turn to blink in surprise before turning toward the blonde man seated across from her. Bakugou swallowed his bite but refused to meet her gaze. Listen, I think we need to be careful. Huh? Uraraka squeaked in surprise at him. She angled her body to face him again and planted a hand on her aproned waist. Bakugou still kept his gaze trained to the side. At work, you know, with us. He waved a hand from his chest toward her awkwardly. Oh, Uraraka frowned back at him. Sure, I guess. It's just Bakugou cut himself off and shook his head before looking down at his breakfast. I don't want to give anyone any ideas. It could spell trouble. Uraraka paused to consider him. Based on his aloof behavior since he arrived at her apartment, she felt like there was more to his comment than its face value. She swiped a loose hair behind her ear before giving him a hard look. Kirishima is the only one who knows about this, and I don't think we were being obvious. Fucking, Bakugou grumbled under his breath. I didn't mean it like that. He finally turned a guarded red gaze on her. Uraraka held her frown and gripped her hip a little tighter. Okay. She trailed off and raised her chin slightly, hoping he'd elaborate. We work together. Bakugou rested his chin in his hand that was propped up on the counter. It could be a problem later. The brunette licked her lips thoughtfully and nodded her head away from his gaze. So you're saying that we need to be more discreet? Earthworm knows. Bakugou finally spit it out and cursed quietly. A sudden realization washed over her. So, he was worked up because Earthworm had found his way in the loop somehow. I see. Did he tease you about it or something? Fuck no. Bakugou felt a spike of irritation. That asshole just knows me too well. He saw right through us, and it's only a matter of time before other people notice too. Uraraka swallowed hard and took a shot in the dark. So you don't want people to know about us then? It felt like a kick in the gut to say aloud, but she had felt that cloud looming over her for a few days. It was never going to be a good time to discuss their future, and perhaps they had both been dodging the topic for fear of having to finally clear the air. Nonetheless, she had known that this talk was coming eventually. Bakugou bit the inside of his cheek and turned his gaze away from the suddenly disappointed look on her face. He didn't know what to say to her that would fix their problem. She didn't have all the facts yet, and she was already making wrong assumptions. It almost seemed like the easier route to take rather than having to explain to her the real situation. It's not that, Bakugou replied reluctantly, already regretting bringing the topic up entirely. He took a deep breath and leaned back in the barstool chair. He told me that we have to stop this, or one of us will have to transfer. What? Uraraka blurted out, jerking her gaze back to him. Bakugou put on the most flat expression he could muster before nodding at her. Etshot has a rule about it, I guess. Uraraka cocked her head at him. What kind of rule? He doesn't let people working at the agency to, well, date. Uraraka hummed quietly and looked down at her hands as she leaned her butt against the cabinets below her counter. I guess that makes sense. Her stomach was a mess of disappointment and butterflies. He'd used the date word. Did he think that they'd been dating? Bakugou pushed the plate away and watched her silently. He could only see her side profile, so he couldn't get a good read on what she was thinking. An awkward air settled between them, and he wished he hadn't brought it up at all. So, Uraraka started again after a long moment, but she couldn't finish the question she desperately wanted to ask. Where does that leave them? Bakugou scowled to himself before filling the silence. I want to catch Viper. He looked up at her. I know you do too. Yeah, she mumbled in agreement, but she was questioning how committed she really was to the mission. If one of us is to transfer, then dash. I know. Uraraka cut him off with a flat tone before she met his gaze. She was surprised to see a flicker of emotion there. His mouth wasn't tightly held in place, and his eyebrows looked relaxed. We both need to be on this mission. We started it, so it's only fair that we get to be the ones that end it. Bakugou's face fell back into a stoic frown. I need to get into the top 10, and catching Viper will help me do that. Not to mention the fact that I want to make that asshole eat one of my explosions. I want to catch him too, Uraraka said aloud, hoping to ignite the determination he usually inspired in her. She squeezed her hands into fists at her sides, and I know that we can do it together. Bakugou examined her face, searching for something to help him, but it was painfully obvious that she was struggling to put on a brave face. It will help your career a lot, and you'll get stronger. Uraraka unclenched her hands and looked down at them. My quirk hasn't been right since I got hurt, though. I haven't been able to get it to where it needs to be to fight Viper again. For fuck's sake, round face, Bakugou grumbled and sat up straight. Shit doesn't get fixed overnight, you know. She blinked and dropped her hands. Well, of course I know that. Training with Mirio helped a lot, and I've been dash. Train with me, he cut in sharply, bringing her attention back onto him. She bit her lip and furrowed her brow. Is that a good idea? Why wouldn't it? He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned them on the top of the counter. Uraraka shrugged awkwardly. I mean, if we can't see each other anymore, then wouldn't that be like rubbing salt in the wound? His heart plummeted to his stomach, and he cursed under his breath. She wasn't wrong about that. Spending more time with each other would only make it harder for them both, but a much bigger part of himself didn't want to push her away like that. Her mention of training with Mirio had stirred an awful feeling in his chest, and thinking about her spending her time with anyone else only made him feel worse. The job always came first. Well, that's what he'd always told himself at least. He wanted that top 10 spot so fucking bad that he spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about it. It was his dream, and up to this point, nothing had been significant enough to get in his way. A few months ago, he would have gladly walked over even her to get there, but now, he felt the urge to take a risk. Risk his dream for a girl? Who the fuck had he become? Bakugou, Uraraka mumbled quietly and leaned across the counter to look at him in the eyes. If you want to stop this, then I understand. I won't hold it against you. A pang of guilt washed over him, and he could clearly see a sad glaze in her eyes. She was giving him an out, and he knew he should take it. However, sitting in her kitchen with a poorly cooked breakfast and the birds chirping outside the window felt so good. He'd grown accustomed to having her around, so going back to dreary silent nights seemed awful. I don't know what else to do, he replied with a single shake of his head. Uraraka inhaled sharply through her nose and blinked her eyes a few times. I could transfer if you want. No, he replied coldly. Not a fucking chance in hell. It's not a big deal. She stood up straight. There are a bunch of other agencies in town. I could dash. I said no. Bakugou's tone was callous and rude. I'm not going to let you put your shit on hold because of me. You've done that enough times already for someone else. If either of us is going to transfer, it should be me. No way. Uraraka frowned at him as she allowed her voice to raise slightly. You have a tenureship with Edshot's agency that's much longer than mine. If you transfer, then you'll lose everything you've been working so hard on. I have a high rank, Bakugou bit back. I could go anywhere I want and kick enough asses to get to the top. I could even go across the fucking world. Would you? Uraraka felt a flare of resentment, and she glared at him. Would you leave? The blonde quickly swallowed the anger that had been building up in his chest when he saw the hurt expression she was wearing. All at once, he was reminded of Uraraka's past troubles and heartache. It had been wrong to take a dig at Deco during a conversation this serious. He'd offended her. She was not the sort of woman to leave behind. No. He looked away to hide the shameful frown on his lips. Uraraka sighed deeply and shook her head. I don't want either of us to transfer. Well, we don't really have a fucking choice, do we? He kept his gaze away from her. It's either that or we call this thing off. Then we call it off. Uraraka replied softly and blinked hard to keep the tears gathering in her eyes at bay. Fine. He felt like they'd been beating around the bush up to that point, but hearing her actually say it made him want to break something. He rose sharply out of the stool and walked silently to her bedroom to grab his duffel bag. He crossed the apartment, and he could feel her gaze on him as he did. He turned to see the watery look in her eyes as he stopped by the door to kick on his shoes, and it made his chest feel like it had cracked. He grabbed the doorknob to her front door and yanked it open. He paused before stepping through. After we catch Viper, he looked outside. I'll transfer. Uraraka couldn't bring herself to say anything as the door slammed shut behind him, but she didn't hear his footsteps walking away until a few more minutes had passed. She felt her lips tremble as she leaned against the countertop, and she felt hopelessly empty. She hadn't even had the chance to truly get to know him, and it was already over. But there was still a chance. After we catch Viper, I'll transfer. Kirishima felt like he had grown wings and joined the angels. There was a happy skip to his step as he paraded down the hallway of the agency, and he chuckled to himself as he passed by Bakugou's empty office. Uraraka wasn't at the morning briefing either, and he felt a smirk play on his lips. Perhaps he wasn't the only one that had a good night. His phone dinged, and he dug it out from the pocket of his Red Riot costume with a boyish grin. He unlocked it and laughed aloud at the text. Mina, check it out. We made the news. He clicked the link she'd sent him, and it pulled up an article that was titled, Hawks Gets Midnight Makeover, but the number 2 hero is taking notes. He scrolled down to read that the hero had laughed it off and commented on the Vandal's superior sense of style. Kirishima was greatly amused and slightly relieved that Mina likely wouldn't be caught as the culprit. Kirishima, you should have left a business card for him. Dinner tonight? He made it to his office and plopped down in his chair. He was anxious for her reply as he began to consider different restaurant options for them. He'd been out with Mina plenty of times, but he didn't want to go to any of their normal spots. Their first proper date had to wow her enough to get her to agree to a second. He was thoughtfully tapping his fingers on his desk when his phone chimed again. Mina, can't. Uraraka already called dibs on me. Well, that's a bummer. Kirishima, girls' night? You know I want in. The text went unanswered, and that puzzled him. Mina always had her phone in her hand, but perhaps she was more serious than he thought about playing hard to get. Regardless, he resisted the urge to press send on another message and fired up his computer. He and Bakugou usually took the afternoon patrol, so he needed to catch up on paperwork before then. He wasn't expecting Bakugou until after lunch, but much to the redhead's surprise, the blonde stomped his way past his open office door before a door slammed down the hall. Kirishima blinked and glanced at the time to find that it was only mid-morning. Something was off. The phone on his desk dinged again as we went to get out of his chair, and he took a moment to glance at the text. Mina, I think this girls' night will just have to be for the girls. I'll tell you what's up when I know more. Let's do dinner on Friday instead. Now Kirishima was concerned. He left the phone on his desk before he poked his head into the hallway to see that Bakugou's door was shut. He slowly wandered down the hall and pushed the door open to find the blonde seated in his desk chair, staring out the window to the city. No. Bakugou's tone left no room for argument, but Kirishima didn't allow it to sway him. The redhead silently shut the door behind him before carefully stepping further into the small room. What happened? Bakugou turned a fierce glare on his friend. Fuck you. Go away. Kirishima only blinked back in shock. He hadn't seen Bakugou this angry in a very long time. He was essentially a ticking time bomb seated in a desk chair, and it took him back to the early days of their friendship. He'd often pop into the blonde's high school dorm room, hoping to strike up a conversation, but Bakugou would only have to look at him to send him running. However, this wasn't anything like one of those times. It was the same anger, but a totally new underlying problem. I thought you guys were doing great. Kirishima looked down at the blonde, worry lines beginning to form on his forehead and mouth. Bakugou slammed a closed fist on the armrest of his chair. Go the fuck away. Did you guys have a fight? Fuck off. Bakugou charged out of his chair and shouldered past the redhead. He threw open the office door and stormed out, but Kirishima was hot on his heels. The redhead already knew where he was going and the reason for it. The training gym was quiet in the mid-morning. Only one other hero was there, but they were preoccupied with the water training equipment in the corner, leaving Bakugou plenty of room to work out his emotions. Kirishima squared up and stepped in front of the blonde, waving his hands tauntingly. Come at me. Bakugou didn't waste a second to fire off a shot at his teammate. He was deeply annoyed that Kirishima couldn't leave him alone. Couldn't that dense asshole mind his own business for once? Kirishima reflexively hardened his arms to block the shot, but before the smoke could begin to clear, Bakugou was charging through it feet first. Kirishima used his hardened arms to absorb the kick attack before he quickly got a hold on the blonde's ankle and tossed him to the side with bruising force. Bakugou threw one hand out toward the ground and used a small explosion to slow his speed before his shoulder met the stone floor. He rolled once before propping himself up on one knee and using both palms to release a scorching attack on the redhead. Kirishima knew better than to take one of Bakugou's heavy-hitting attacks head-on, so he jumped to the side and sprinted along the side of the flames and smoke. Once he was close enough, he fell down on his hip, sliding in below the blonde's line of fire. He hardened himself entirely before kicking Bakugou's knee to the side and crippling the blonde's offensive stance.
Deep.
Bakugou shouted as he finally noticed Kirishima on the ground. He wobbled for a second before twisting his torso and pivoting his feet to regain his balance. The moment he realigned his palms, Kirishima was off the ground and punching him in the side. What the hell is wrong with you, man? Kirishima grunted as he narrowly missed Bakugou's counterpunch. He threw the weight of his body back, crossing his arms over his face to block a haymaker. You seem pretty upset. Bakugou growled loudly as his palms sizzled, and he brought his other hand around to try and hit Kirishima with a blast he shouldn't be able to dodge. However, Kirishima had practiced this move with him countless times and saw the attack coming from a mile away. The redhead put all his strength into the soles of his feet before tackling the blonde in front of him. By the time Bakugou's back hit the ground, Kirishima reached for the blonde's right arm and maneuvered himself so he could pin the blonde's head down with his legs in a classic wrestling pin. However, the blonde wasn't going to go down easy. Kirishima felt the heat of Bakugou's left hand explosion long before it happened. He had pinned Bakugou's right arm against his chest as his back hit the ground. He twisted his body to try and wrap his legs around Bakugou's neck as he held his arm tightly, and he used his right foot to kick the blonde's free hand. Bakugou hissed angrily and bucked his legs, forcing Kirishima to loosen his grip to let go of his arm. The blonde was on one knee in the span of a second and didn't hesitate to blast the ground where Kirishima had him nearly pinned. What the fuck happened, Bakugou? Kirishima shouted after he barely missed the shot and tumbled on the floor. He lifted himself up on his hands and threw his lower half in a circle through the air, violently colliding with Bakugou's wrists and redirecting the next blast to the wall of the training gym. Did she dump you? Bakugou roared angrily. Leave it the fuck alone. He was seeing red now as he jumped back to fire off a shot from a distance. Kirishima didn't have time to dodge it, so he broke out his ultimate move, Unbreakable. His hardened skin was left feeling hot once the attack was over, but he charged forward, yelling incoherent battle cries. Bakugou felt the punch to his cheek before he even realized it was coming. Kirishima had grown a lot stronger and faster in the last few years, but it still shocked Bakugou that his partner was able to land a hit on him at all. The taste of blood in his mouth only derailed Bakugou's anger exponentially, but he knew that his attacks would do nothing to Kirishima in the unbreakable form. The best choice was to retreat and wait for an opening. "What is it, Bakugou?" Kirishima pressed with an icy tone. "Just a moment ago, you nearly had me." "Shut the fuck up." Bakugou bit back. A few drops of blood mixed with spit seemed to hover in the air as the blonde used one of his grenadiers to block the incoming punch. The shell of the grenadier cracked, but it opened up enough time for Bakugou to attempt a retreat. Not so fast. Kirishima used one of his ultra-hardened legs to kick out the blonde's feet out from under him, sending Bakugou careening backward. Thinking fast, Bakugou threw his palms back and fired off 2 high-powered blasts, launching him up, but Kirishima saw that move coming too. The blonde felt himself stall in midair before there was a hard tug on the back of his black cargo pants. "You're not going to get anywhere when you're this distracted, Bakugou," Kirishima grunted out as he threw the blonde down on his back. He felt bad for his friend as he watched the air leave Bakugou's lungs on impact and blood dripped from his nose. "Fuck you." Bakugou's voice was hoarse as his fiery red eyes zeroed in on Kirishima. He hadn't gotten a full breath, but he acted anyway, using sheer force of will to force himself to roll to the side before Kirishima could plant a foot on his chest. He sat up and pointed his one good grenadier at the redhead before pulling the pin. Kirishima knew that the timer on his ultimate move was running out fast, so he threw himself forward as the blast began to form. He crashed into the blonde with significant force, but the blast sent them reeling backward, and it caused his hardening move to dissipate. The two men grappled in midair before Bakugou managed to land a kick to Kirishima's chest, throwing him off. Kirishima landed awkwardly and tumbled on the stone floor. He caught sight of Bakugou a few meters away, clawing his way onto his feet again. "Why the fuck are you always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" Bakugou barked as he ripped the broken grenadier from his left arm and threw it to the ground. "This shit is all your fault." "What are you talking about?" Kirishima felt a flare of confused anger and forced himself off the ground. "I didn't do anything." Bakugou glowered at the redhead. "If you hadn't played matchmaker, I wouldn't have fallen in love with her." "You're mad because you're in love?" Kirishima shouted back, aghast at Bakugou's response. He slid his feet further apart, sensing the potential for an incoming attack. Bakugou's eyes lit up with embers of hurt that had descended into hatred. "I was fine until she got here. I was on my way to the top." "That hasn't changed, Bakugou." Kirishima frowned back and readied his fists. "You can still be the #1 hero and be happy at the same time." "Fuck you." Bakugou spit disdainfully and shook his head in disgust. "You have no idea what the hell you're talking about, Kirishima. You set me up. I didn't do anything but help you." Kirishima didn't dare take his eyes off the blonde. Bakugou had slipped into his most irrational mode, and he knew that the only way to deal with him was head-on. "What happened, Bakugou? Did she end it? Did you end it?" "Tisich." Bakugou jeered at his only friend in a show of disbelief. "It doesn't fucking matter who ended it." Kirishima blinked in confusion. "What the hell is that even supposed to mean?" Bakugou jerked his head away in absolute rage before he began to march across the floor, closing the distance between them. "Did you know that the agency has a rule about dating your coworkers?" His eyes felt like they burned holes through the redhead. "Did you know that when you set me up, Kirishima?" "I didn't set you up, asshole." Kirishima crossed his arms over his face to stop a predictable punch once Bakugou reached him. "You're the one who pined over her for months, remember? You're the one who chased off Mirio and Deku and everyone else. You're the one who saved her life. You fell in love with her all on your own." "Oh yeah." Bakugou landed a kick to Kirishima's gut with alarming speed, sending the redhead skidding over the floor. "What about the time you made me apologize to her? Or the time you and that stupid fucking Pinky pressured the shit out of me at the party? Or what about Dash?" "Hey." Kirishima felt his blood begin to boil. Leave Mina out of this. Tsh. Bagwo sneered and rushed forward to shove Kirishima. She's just as involved as you are, but she was playing for the other team. Kirishima slammed an open palm against Bakugou's chest. Quirk's long forgotten now. Yeah, well, maybe she was right. You're acting like a real dick right now. Bakugou took the hit but didn't flinch. Well, when I am such a huge dick, I don't have to deal with shit like choosing between my dreams and a girl. Bakugou. Kirishima's tone was icy. You don't have to choose between one or the other. You can have both, you fucking moron. Fuck you. Bakugou moved quickly to try and land another punch, but Kirishima blocked it easily. Stop. Kirishima grabbed the blonde's wrist and shoved his opposite shoulder. Just fucking stop. I'm your best friend, man. I wasn't out to get you. Bakugou was shaking with rage as he met his friend's intense gaze. Then why the fuck am I so angry? Kirishima let go of Bakugou and dropped his hands. You're not angry, idiot. You're hurt. That's bullshit. The blonde bit back and wiped his bloody nose with the back of his hand. Kirishima finally began to let go of the frustration that had built up in his gut. Now that he understood why his friend was so worked up, he couldn't be angry anymore. Listen, man, I don't know what you want me to tell you. I know how you feel about uraraka, and I don't like seeing you like this. Bakugou spit blood onto the ground and pulled the mask off his face. Kirishima had calmed down a lot, and as if on instinct, so had he. Somehow, that dumbass had diffused the situation, and he felt like he could think clearly again. Well, I can't do anything about it now. So what then? Did you guys break up? Kirishima tried to catch the blonde's eyes, but Bakugou refused to let him. I guess. Bakugou turned to the side and looked across the gym blankly. It's not like we were dating or anything. I thought you guys were keeping it a secret. Kirishima probed for more information, hoping that Bakugou's vulnerable state would help him open up a bit. Why not continue doing that? If Edshot finds out, we could both get transferred or maybe even fired. Bakugou replied flatly, his chest twisting uncomfortably. I can't do that shit to uraraka. Kirishima hummed in recognition. Why don't you just go and talk to Edshot? Maybe he'll be willing to hear you out. Earthworm made it crystal fucking clear to me that Edshot should know, but that beside the point. Both of us need to stay on the Viper case. Bakugou kicked at the floor under his feet mindlessly. Maybe her more than me, but still. Kirishima sighed defeatedly. So, what are you going to do? Fuck, Bakugou grumbled, his voice slightly strained. I told uraraka that after we catch Viper, I'm going to transfer so she can stay here at the Edshot agency. He glanced back at his partner. I wouldn't blame you if you stayed here too. This isn't about me and you. Kirishima shook his head. But you know that we're a package deal, man. Still though, if that's the case, then why are you so worked up? You guys can still be together after all of this is over. Huh. Bakugou grunted and ran a hand through his sweaty hair. The only lead I have on Viper could turn out to be a total bust. Who knows how long this shit will go on for? This could take years. It's a career-making case. That's really rough, dude. Kirishima stepped forward to clap a hand on his friend's shoulder comfortingly, but Bakugou shrugged it off right away. I don't know what to say other than the fact that I'll go wherever you go. As long as we don't go to Mina's agency after all this is said and done. Bakugou gave his friend a dark look. And subject myself to her torment day in and day out? No fucking thanks. The best agency is Endeavor's in Kyoto. That's a huge change. Kirishima tucked his hands into the pockets of his pants and whistled uncomfortably. Kyoto is pretty far away, man. I'm sure we'd be better off starting our own agency here if you ask me. I thought about that, Bakugou remarked with an uneasy breath, but I'd need to break the top 10 first. I need the publicity of a good rank in order to pull that shit off. Hey, Kirishima gave his friend a sideways glance. You do what you have to do to be with uraraka. You're way less annoying when you're around her, so hurry up and figure something out. I don't want to have to duel you like this again. Bakugou grunted, feeling a spike of irritation. Fuck you, Kirishima. It's not like I know what the hell I'm supposed to do. It'll come to you. Kirishima bumped shoulders with him before he departed for the gym's exit. I have a feeling you two won't be able to stay apart for long. I have to go do paperwork now that you've worked out your issues. Call me when you're ready for patrol. Bakugou scowled at his friend's back before he began to wander toward his broken grenadier that was laying on the ground. A few pieces had chipped off where Kirishima had cracked it, but that was the least of Bakugou's concerns. His body ached horribly, and he was suddenly exhausted. The little sleep he had accrued from the night before combined with the stress he'd been piling up was finally getting to him. What was he going to do when he saw Uraraka again? She'd be showing up for work any time now, and he didn't know how he was supposed to handle that. Pretending like nothing had happened was easier said than done, especially when they had to work so closely together on the Viper case. He wondered how she was feeling. Leaving her apartment that morning was painful to say the least. He had replayed the conversation in his head 100 times by now, and he was angry with himself for not saying more to her about how he felt. He wished that he could go back in time and not bring it up at all so that he could have her to himself for one more day. Maybe he would have never told her, keeping them a secret for as long as he could. The thought of going home to his apartment alone tonight sounded terrible. They'd grown into the habit of watching game shows together, and then he'd make dinner while she called her parents. His mind harkened back to their conversation on the park bench when she'd asked him to meet her parents. He hadn't been sure if she was simply saying that or if she'd meant it sincerely, but he hadn't gotten the chance to ask her. If she had been serious about it, then that could only mean that she wanted.
No.
He can't think about that right now. They couldn't date, at least not yet. When the time came for it, though, he'd ask her then if she had been serious. For now, he needed to put every drop of effort into rooting out Viper. The sooner that villain was brought to justice, the sooner he could reach the top 10 and do things by the book, just like Earthworm had told him to. It probably wouldn't kill him to let the media in a little more too. After all, they were the ones that made heroes famous, and he needed that now more than ever. He supposed he'd just have to suck it up and fake it until he makes it. If it was for Uraraka, then he'd suffer his way through it, despite his injured pride. He would get her back. He had to. In the meantime, he'd just chase off anyone that threatened that until he could seal the deal. He just hoped she felt the same way. Mina was pushing her way through the door before Uraraka had even finished turning the handle. "Move it. I'm carrying precious cargo." Uraraka didn't have to look to know that it was wine. "Hey, Mina. I have so much to tell you." She dumped her purse onto the couch before setting the bottles down on Uraraka's countertop. "But first we drink." Uraraka silently watched as the pinkette deftly popped the cork on a rose and clambered through her cabinets for the 2 wine glasses she had gifted her. "Here." Mina passed a heavy glass of pink alcohol to her friend. Uraraka accepted the glass and took a sip, barely tasting the liquid on her tongue. She watched as Mina began to meander around the apartment, peeking into the bedroom. "What the hell is going on in here?" Mina jerked her head toward her friend and pointed inside the bedroom. "I got a new bed." Uraraka shrugged, "but I haven't been able to put it together yet, so I'm just going to sleep on the floor until someone can help me with it." "Why doesn't Bakugou just do it?" Mina asked pointedly and took note of the surprised look on her friend's face. "Yeah, I know about that. You weren't going to be able to hide that from me for long, honey." "How did you dash?" Uraraka started before she stopped herself with a knowing frown. "Kirishima." "Not exactly." Mina giggled and hovered her glass in front of her mouth. "He really did try and keep a lid on it. Poor guy doesn't realize that I've got him wrapped around my finger." Mina's gaze circled the apartment before they fell on Uraraka's duffel bag. It didn't go to work today?" I called out. Uraraka mumbled and wandered into the living room to sit down on the sofa. "I just didn't have the energy for it today." She put the glass to her lips and took a bigger drink. Mina furrowed her eyebrows. "So, is that why you asked me to come over?" Uraraka shrugged. "I guess. I don't know really. I'm just so." She choked on the beginnings of a sob before she swallowed it back and composed herself. "I guess I just needed a friend." "Well, you've got one." Mina crossed the apartment to sit down beside her friend and give her a half-hug. "What's going on? Did Bakugou do something to you?" No. Uraraka shook her head hard. "It's just that things are super confusing right now, and I don't know what to do." Mina hummed and stood up. She ran to the kitchen and snatched the bottle of wine off the counter and ran back. Once she plopped down on the sofa, she raised her glass. "Why don't you start at the beginning, huh? Tell me everything, and we'll figure it out together. Uraraka sniffed hard and blinked away a tear that threatened to fall. Yeah, okay. You're a really great friend, Mina. Well, what can I say? Mina tittered haughtily. You only deserve the best. That goes for friends, and men too. Now stop stalling, girlie. I want the details. Uraraka nodded and took another long drink before she began. She told Mina everything that had happened between herself and Bakugou since they faced Viper. She talked about her hospital stay, her breakup with Deku, moving his stuff out of the apartment, and the party at the bar that led to her first kiss with Bakugou. She spoke at great length about the awkwardness that had ensued between them and how they'd finally bridged the gap when they argued in his office. The most painful part of the story was everything that followed that. Overnight, they'd gone from being perfectly happy together to nothing at all. All because of a stupid agency rule. By the time she finished, the bottle of wine was nearly empty, and Uraraka had already shed quite a few tears. Mina was rubbing comforting circles in her back as she listened to Uraraka finish telling her about that morning. I couldn't go to work today and see him again so soon. Uraraka sniffled and wiped her nose. I mean, what am I supposed to say or do? Should I just pretend like nothing happened? No, of course not, Mina continued to rub her back. Oh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry, Uraraka. The brunette raised her glass to her lips with a shaky hand. This entire thing is just so stupid. I can only imagine. Mina had filed away telling Uraraka about her and Kirishima in her mind. Now wasn't a good time to share that sort of news. Uraraka was already hurting bad enough without her rubbing in her newfound happiness. She'd tell her friend another day. The worst part about it is the fact that Bakugou said he was going to transfer once this is all over. Uraraka swiped a loose tear from under her eyes. He said that I'd already done enough of that, and he wouldn't let me do it again. I just thought that if I transferred, then all our problems would be solved, you know? It makes more sense for me to transfer anyway. You could transfer to my agency, Mina started with a smile. We're not nearly as big as Edgeshots, but I'm sure that we could find a place for you. Maybe we could partner up on the Viper case there. Uraraka laughed weakly. That's what I thought too, but I already know that Bakugou would insist that he be the one to transfer. He said that his rank was high enough to be protected from a transfer, especially after we defeat Viper. I hate to say it, but I kind of agree with him. He does have a point, Mina nodded at her friend, but still, who knows how long it could be before that happens. I don't want to lose him, Mina. Uraraka stumbled over her words, fighting the drunken slur on her lips. I think I love him. Oh, honey. Mina set her glass down on the floor before pulling her friend into a full hug. Trust me, you're not going to lose that one. He only has eyes for you. Uraraka took a deep breath, trying to work up some self-control. So you're not mad? Why would I be mad? Mina pulled back and gave Uraraka a worried look. Uraraka drunkenly floundered her arms for a moment, sloshing the wine at the bottom of her glass. I thought you didn't like Bakugou and I being together. Mina laughed lightly. I thought I already covered this with you, silly. I'm the one that told you to tell him how you feel, remember? Yeah, but still. Uraraka let her shoulders droop. I know you and him aren't on the best of terms. Bakugou and I are just fine. Mina patted her friend's arm. We're just very different people is all. He gets annoyed with me really easily and honestly, I can't blame him for that. I can be a real handful sometimes, but that doesn't make him any less of a jerk when he gives me a hard time for it. We just have personalities that clash and honestly, I didn't think he had what it took to be good to you. Uraraka sniffed and blinked at her friend. What? Yeah, Mina scooped up her cup and took a drink. Kirishima and I argued about it a lot at the beginning. I was all over his case for getting in the way of you and Deku. I was definitely on Deku's team for a good long while. Uraraka chuckled weakly. I can see that now. I guess that's why I never really talked to you about what was going on. I was scared you'd judge me. Mina gave her friend a sympathetic look. Oh, I was definitely judging you, but I can admit now that I was wrong. Listen. She twisted her body to face Uraraka directly. After Edshot's party and Deku showed up, Bakugou was basically waving around a flag that he was in love with you. I tried just about everything I could think of to keep him away, but damn it, he just couldn't let you go. Part of me still wonders what would have happened if you'd forgiven Deku after Kihin, but now I'm beginning to realize that there was no chance in hell that was going to happen. If bakugou makes you happy, then stop crying about it and do something. Huh. Uraraka breathed defeatedly. Like what? I can't do anything unless I transfer to another agency, and if I do that, bakugou will freak out. Then don't transfer, Mina shrugged. Shot doesn't need to know about you guys until Viper is in custody, right? Just, she shrugged suggestively. Flaunt it a little. I promise, bakugou won't last long at all if you do that. Flaunt it. Uraraka frowned. Flaunt what? Mina shouldered her playfully. That. She glanced down Uraraka's back. He's a total ass guy. What? Trust me, Uraraka. Just take my word for it, and thank me later. Mina, now that we're on the topic, you have to tell me about what he's like in bed. I've been dying to know. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.